Class is now in session. I am Professor Hockey, and today we'll be discussing Game 5 of the regular season for the San Jose Sharks as they took on the Winnipeg Jets and lost by a score of 8-3. And it was just yesterday in the game against Chicago that I talked about how that was the Sharks' worst game of the season thus far. Well, not even 24 hours later, there's a new sheriff in town as this game against the Winnipeg Jets completely blows that one out of the water. The Sharks looked unmotivated. They looked disinterested and disjointed. They were losing every puck race and every puck battle. This was the type of game that would have not looked out of place in, let's say, the middle of March of last season. That's how just out of it the Sharks actually looked like as a team. It was expected that San Jose would be near the bottom of the standings for this season as well, in the bottom 5 of the entire league, but it was hopeful that the Sharks would actually be a little bit more competitive in some of their losses, and that's how this season started off in those first 3 games. St. Louis, Anaheim, Dallas, they had some bright moments even in those losing efforts. Here tonight, not the case. The Jets skated circles around the San Jose Sharks, and there are possible excuses to give. The final game of a road trip, second half of a back-to-back, the Sharks looking really short-handed here. The Jets are a significantly better team, but there is absolutely no excuse for the type of effort that just looked completely like going through the motions here for most of the Sharks roster. There's no excuse for the effort that the Sharks actually gave up. An 8-3 loss, an NHL versus AHL team looking situation here. Terrible, terrible game for San Jose. Like I said, one much more looking like a last year San Jose game and not so much a what was the Sharks were hoping for from this year's team. It starts off, as obviously, with a Jets first goal of the game from Josh Morrissey, but that's actually not the beginning of the problems for San Jose. It actually comes on their second goal, and it is the beginning of the march to the penalty box yet again. Yesterday, the biggest problem for San Jose was their lack of discipline. 7 minor penalties, and that's something that can be improved on. Yeah, you're never going to be a better team than the Winnipeg Jets on paper, but you can at least try to not give them golden opportunities to get goals in these games. And yet, again, the Sharks end up with another 7 minor penalties. Sure, 1 or 2 of them may have been some bad calls from refs. There was like a slashing call that was exceptionally weak, but at the end of the day, you cannot make it as easy as it has been for the officials to make these calls. There's a reason why the Sharks are probably, I don't even have to look at this stat, I would imagine they're the most penalized team when it comes to minor penalties in the league thus far this season. It is just an absolutely terrible look, and I must point out one player in particular on this Ehlers goal. The first penalty is taken, the Sharks 5-on-4, not the end of the world, but then it is Jan Ruda for the second straight game who takes a completely uncalled for retaliatory penalty to put the Sharks down 5-on-3. I don't care how much leadership you're bringing, how much Stanley Cup pedigree, how much of a veteran player you are. This is simply an unacceptable moment for Jan Ruda in 2 straight games. Even the best of the best players doing this, I would say, deserve to be benched for the next game at the very least. He should not be playing on Sunday against the Colorado Avalanche. This is just a completely unacceptable moment for any player to be able to make. It is so incredibly selfish for Ruda to do this, especially this early on in the game. I honestly cannot believe that someone like that would actually make a play like that. Just so disappointing to see for sure. Now, eventually the Sharks would actually cut the lead in half with a power play goal from Tyler Toffoli, his 4th of the season, but then the Jets would continue to pile on and it would be a 4-1 lead at the end of the first period. In the second, the Sharks would go blow for blow with the Jets at least on the scoreboard, though of course the Jets were significantly better in that middle frame anyhow, but it would be a 5-2 score at the end of 2, and then in the third, the Jets will continue to pile on with another couple of power play goals, and it is an 8-3 score at the end of it. On to the roster, as I mentioned, the Sharks were quite short-handed here tonight. Obviously, the notable absence of Macklin Celebrini continues to hang over this team. He's missed every game except the first of the season, but that was added to by the missing piece of William Eklund. He was actually a game-time decision yesterday against Chicago, ended up playing, but he himself admitted that he was not 100%, and so it is not that much of a surprise that he would miss tonight's game against Winnipeg. Hopefully, it's not too serious and he can be back in the lineup, but that was obviously a big loss for San Jose. And then the other player stepping out, not due to injury, is actually Will Smith. So it seems as though the Sharks are trying to take a very measured approach, kind of load management type of approach with Will Smith. We saw the Anaheim Ducks, for instance, do this with their teenage rookie talent with Leo Carlsson last year. Sharks trying that as well. It is kind of funny that after the first 3 games where Will Smith was honestly kind of bad, he then got game 4 against Chicago where it was his best performance of the year by far, and then he's immediately benched the following day. But it seems as though this was always the plan for San Jose. Will Smith well aware of it. It is not performance based, but with the player who stepped in for him, Giovanni Smith, it is still quite clear that the Sharks got a good bit worse with his absence. So indeed, on paper, this was always going to be a very, very tough game for the Sharks to perform well in, but still an 8-3 loss. You can't be doing that in the NHL. At the top line here, we have Zetterlund with Granlund and Toffoli. Interesting that the Sharks decide to still load up their top line. Obviously, yesterday it was Eklund with Granlund and Toffoli. Now with him gone, Zetterlund steps up. And this was a big moment for Fabian Zetterlund to try and prove what he's able to do. His first 4 games of the season have been shaky, but that can be sort of given a reasoning for because of the fact that his line mates weren't playing all that great. Last game it was Kostin. The first few games it was Will Smith. Here tonight, though, he's playing with the 2 best forwards for the San Jose Sharks, and yet Zetterlund still wasn't all that good. I was rather disappointed with most of this first line, in fact, throughout this game. Sure, they had a few decent shifts in the third period, but that was at a time in which the Jets had pretty much checked out mentally of this game. Like I mentioned yesterday, score effects begin to play a part when your team is trailing by so many goals because the other team kind of lays up a little bit. So it's nice that Zetterlund was able to score and get a couple of okay shifts at the end of the game, but in the parts where it actually mattered, the first, the second period, this first line and Zetterlund, of course, did not really do anything. The same would go for Mikael Granlund, who had been the Sharks' best forward in pretty much each of the past 3 games, but he stepped back a huge amount here tonight. A lot of really bad giveaways for himself, definitely an off night. And then when it comes to Tyler Toffoli, you do have to commend Toffoli's ability to still manage to put up goal after goal after goal, even in games where he's not necessarily playing all that well. But still, it was a game that I wasn't super impressed with Toffoli. Now, relative to the rest of the team, this first line wasn't all that bad. They were still one of the Sharks' better lines, but generally this first line was still not good because the Sharks as a whole were terrible here tonight against Winnipeg. So pretty disappointing game for a first line that should have these high expectations compared to everybody else pretty much. On the second line, we have Wenberg and Barclay Goodrow being joined by Danil Gushchin. So with Eklund and Will Smith out of the lineup, the 2 players who were on the outside looking in have to get in, and so Warsawski is forced to have Gushchin in the lineup. And I must say, don't want to rub it in or anything, but Gushchin was likely one of the best players, if not the best player. There's an argument there, forward at the very least, for the San Jose Sharks here tonight. It felt as though every single time or not every single time, but a lot of the times that he was on the ice, he was actually pushing the pace for San Jose. He was actually getting pucks through the neutral zone. He was playing more so in the offensive zone with his line mates. It wasn't necessarily generating tons of great chances. I think Gushchin only had one really, really good look on net, but still, even just playing in the offensive zone was a massive accomplishment for a team that struggled to do so throughout this entire game. So I was very impressed with what Gushchin was actually able to do. He was actually one of the few players who could win a puck battle. His ability to engage players along the boards, hold them there, and actually get the puck loose was something that was extremely impressive for a player of his size. And so after that game 1 of the season for himself against St. Louis, where he was pretty good, one of the Sharks' better players, but not the best, to see him massively improve here tonight against Winnipeg was really, really nice to see. And if he somehow manages to find himself outside of the lineup on Sunday against the Colorado Avalanche, I will just completely lose faith in any sort of development that the Sharks are going to want to do with this player, because there's absolutely no reason I can think of at least at a minimum 4 forwards who should be stepping out of the lineup over Danil Gushchin at this point going into the next game, and so there's no excuse to have that happen at this point. When it comes to his 2 line mates, we have Alex Wenberg, who continues to be the most average player on the San Jose Sharks this year. There has yet to be a game where I've actually been impressed by Wenberg, but at the same time, I guess, there hasn't really been many games that I've been all that disappointed with him either. He's just kind of there. He's doing okay. He's making some okay defensive plays, some errors as well, not much more than anybody else on this team. So I guess it was a decent night for Wenberg, but still not super impressive and still far below the $5 million that he is making. And then when it comes to Barclay Goodrow, generally, I don't think I've been that disappointed with Goodrow's performance thus far this season. It has honestly been better than what I was expecting. Having said that, there have been some very real problems with Goodrow's game, primarily when it comes to puck management. This is a player who is supposed to be reliable on the ice. You take a look at the Sharks in the past, back when they were a very competitive team, players like Thornton and Burns, they were players who would lead the team in terms of giveaways, right? They would frequently have these giveaway moments, but that was because they would touch the puck so much. They were so involved in the game, so many puck touches, that it was inevitable that they'd end up giving the puck away here and there. Barclay Goodrow is not that type of guy. He's not some offensive phenom where all of the plays run through him. He's supposed to be the reliable veteran player who you know is going to make the smart play each and every time, and yet he has failed to do so multiple times this season, and that was no different here tonight. Multiple awful defensive zone giveaways for Barclay Goodrow in this game. There was one moment where he should have had a very easy pass to either his center or his winger busting out of the zone in the neutral zone, but instead he tries this weird pass back to his defense where the Jets end up punishing him significantly, and that was not the only misplay for Goodrow here tonight. So while I don't actually think it was all around a horrible game for Goodrow, he had some okay moments here. I thought he was decent enough as a compliment to Gushin, though I would have liked to see Gushin play with a bit better offensive players. Seeing him with Granlund and Toffoli would have been a lot more interesting. I don't think Goodrow was horrible, but these major mistakes that seems to still crop up in his game need to be eliminated, because those are the types of disqualifying factors if Goodrow were like a rookie guy or a young player in the NHL. He's simply just lucky that he has had built up so much sort of good karma with the San Jose Sharks for whatever reason, and just in the NHL in general, that he manages to maintain a lineup spot, and pretty high up in the lineup at that, because realistically any other player would have been demoted if not benched at that point, even with those decent games throughout. When it comes to the third line, we have Cunnin joined by Dellandrea and Gunstrom, so 2/3 of this line was technically considered the fourth line last game, so that just shows how shorthanded the Sharks are for this one. And this third line was quite bad. I wasn't particularly impressed at all. Sure, Luke Cunnin, he managed to score. He's been playing with a decent amount of speed. He looked somewhat engaged, but he also looked completely outmatched here tonight. While he was one of the more sort of motivated players, I would say, he didn't look as uninterested as certain other guys. He was still just completely outplayed for sure. Not a great game for him. Dellandrea, who I've been rather impressed with thus far this season through the first 4 games, probably his worst of the season here tonight. And then Carl Grundstrom joining them as well. Just not a great game for the third line as a whole. And then when it comes to the fourth line, like last game's fourth line, this one had a grand total of 1 good chance on net. That one came off of a Kostin shot followed up by a Nico Sturm attempt. That did technically almost go in. It was a close call, almost managed to get that goal there. But besides that, this fourth line did absolutely nothing. Klim Kostin continues to have these terrible giveaways, just really bad moments in this game. He's definitely someone who I could imagine steps out of the lineup when the Sharks get a little bit more healthy, when Smith and Eklund do return, and then eventually Celebrini as well, because he really has been very unimpressive thus far this season. Nico Sturm is really hard to put too much blame on him. Both Kostin Kostin has struggled this season. Smith is just generally not a very good player, so Sturm didn't have the best line mates to actually work with here tonight, but he himself does need to be better individually, and I don't think he was all that great. And then when it comes to Givani Smith, I realized he was strong in this preseason, and so the Sharks felt for whatever reason they needed to keep him around and then run with a 15 forward group to open this year. But the fact is that Givani Smith is just not an NHL player. Funnily enough, the one major reason that I was seeing for why Smith was kept around is so that he could be a sort of protector for players like Celebrini and Will Smith. Neither of those two players were even in the lineup here tonight for Givani Smith's first game of the season. And even if they had been, Smith wasn't even physical here tonight. There weren't some big moments that you were like, wow, Givani Smith making his impact known in this game. He did pretty much nothing here tonight. And so he is definitely the first player. If someone was to come back into the lineup for Sunday, let's say Eklund is still injured, but they want to get Smith back in, Givani Smith is prime candidate number 1 to step out and realistically be the first guy waived when the Sharks actually need to make some room, because he's simply just not good enough. That's just what the case is at the end of the day. He's not good enough to play in the NHL, even on a team that is not that great like the San Jose Sharks. There's just no room for him at this point. When it comes to the defensive side of things, one might expect, like in the many bad games that the Sharks had last year where they gave up 7 goals, 8 goals, 10 goals in 2 straight games, that I would just be trash talking the Sharks defense, every single one of these players, because there would not be any sort of bright spot at all. And that was the case for most of these guys. For instance, starting off with the second defensive pairing, both Ferraro and Ruda were downright horrible here tonight. I've already given my piece a little bit about Ruda when it came to his undisciplined plays in the first period, but besides that, he was still awful defensively. He had just some horrible shifts, so for sure that's another reason why Ruda could very easily be benched for the next game. Ferraro, his defensive partner, really wasn't all that much better. The Sharks, when these two players were on the ice, were playing in their zone about 90% of the time, just not a great look. When it comes to Thrun and Benning continues to struggle. There's not that much of a surprise there. And then when it comes to Henry Thrun, he's just generally been making some really bad reads. I've liked Thrun because I feel as though he's made some positive contributions to this team at times this season from an offensive perspective, but defensively there have just been multiple bad calls in a lot of these games. Here tonight was no different. Multiple times where he's just overloading one side of the ice, leaving the other side completely uncovered, just not really fully aware of his surroundings. So that's been slightly disappointing for sure to see, and it was kind of turned up to 11 here tonight where the Sharks were just so heavily outplayed by the Winnipeg Jets. Just not a great night for either of these two bottom pairings. And then Cody Ceci on the Sharks top pairing, he was really strong to start this season. Then yesterday against Chicago, he wasn't very good, and he followed that up with yet another not very good night here either. Ceci struggled for sure. Not the worst defenseman by far, as he was still a good bit better than most of the other players here, but definitely not anything that you would sing your praises about. But the one bright spot on the back end for San Jose has to be Jake Walman, and it's a big surprise because being on the Sharks' first defensive pairing in a game in which they let up 8 goals, you would think that that would be an opportunity to just get completely buried, and yet Walman was still actually pretty good here tonight. He was making some strong reads. He wasn't that much of a liability defensively. I thought he made some good plays. There was this one moment, this one shift in the first period, I believe, where he ends up blocking a shot and you can tell that he's in pain. He's laboring a bit. It took him a moment to get up, and yet he finishes that shift, and not only does he finish the shift, but he actually makes a couple of strong defensive plays to help get this puck out of the zone before heading to the bench, where he's then seen by the trainer. So the fact that he was basically on one, I think he had gotten hit in the arm, so with one hand was able to make better defensive plays than what we have been seeing from players like Ruda, Ferraro, and Benning pretty much all season, is quite telling for just how far and away better than Walman is than any other defenseman besides maybe Cody Ceci on the Sharks this season. Now, when it comes to the Sharks goaltenders, no surprise that both will factor into this game, in a game in which the Sharks led in 8 goals. Blackwood started, not a surprise there either, because the Sharks have been going back and forth, and it was the second half of a back-to-back. Blackwood, after a great performance in the previous one for him against Dallas, was not good here tonight. Sure, the Jets, they got a lot of chances. They had a ton of zone time, made it hard on Blackwood, but still, kind of like with that St. Louis game in Game 1, a lot of these goals were ones he definitely could have had. The first one by Morrissey is a pretty easy save, honestly, for an NHL goaltender, of course, at least. The Neil Pionk goal also didn't look all that difficult of a save to be able to make. And then the first goal as well by Connor was a bit more difficult, but still a possible save for him, and that was the one that ends up getting him pulled, so not a great outing for Blackwood. Vanacek started this one off very, very well. He made a few key saves at the end of that second period to help keep the Sharks alive, I guess, in this game. Obviously, it ended up falling apart a little bit in the third, though I don't blame Vanacek too much for that either. But generally still not a great outing for the Sharks goaltenders, who let in a combined 8 goals here. It certainly wasn't their fault, but they didn't help either. That will do it for this review. The Sharks will be back in action on Sunday. They'll be taking on the Colorado Avalanche. I don't know the result of their game here tonight against the Anaheim Ducks. I saw at a point that they were down 2-0, so it is possible that they lose that one, which then would actually lead to this game being a game in which one of those teams will get their first win of the year. Surprising for sure that the Colorado Avalanche would be starting this year, I think 0-5, if that actually ends up being the case. But maybe the Sharks can take advantage of a completely floundering Colorado Avalanche team, or maybe on the other side, it'll be the Avalanche who will take advantage of a Sharks team that can't seem to buy a win at this point. Class dismissed.